Look, I'm not saying it's the fault of these late notice fighters that they're in absolutely horrible matchups. In the world of mixed martial arts, if you're given an opportunity like being asked to go into a bout with a major talent on little to no prep time, you take it, and you will be rewarded even if you lose, because it's not about the fight being competitive or you winning when you're put into a spot like this. It's about getting the fight to happen at all. That's all the UFC was looking for, clearly, because there is no justifying these abysmal fights.
He's already dead.
What's up, fight fans? It's Fight Week. UFC 313 is upon us, and everyone can now relax as, yes, Magomed Ankalaev is finally getting a UFC light heavyweight title shot against Alex Pereira. So, being partnered with DraftKings, you know we've got you covered. All new customers who bet just $5 on anything will receive $150 in bonus bets instantly. And you can stay in on the action and use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. Combine multiple bets together from the same fight, including total number of rounds and method of victory. The more bets you combine, the more you can win. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code ONPOINT and bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code ONPOINT only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 absolute worst last-minute replacement opponents ever. Number 10, Ilir Latifi. Okay, I like Ilir Latifi. I'd go so far as to say I love Ilir Latifi. He's awesome. He rides horses on the beach. He has some fun UFC wins. The crowning achievement of his career, undoubtedly putting OSP to sleep. Super fun. That's really honestly the only good win of his career, though. And that was well down the line. Today we're talking about when he made his debut in the promotion on short notice against Gegard Mousasi. At the time, Ilir was 7-2, and Gegard was largely considered one of the best, if not the best, fighters in the world outside of the UFC. 33-3, with everybody just so excited at the prospect of him at 205 pounds, now finally in the biggest promotion in the world, and so of course his debut would be a big fight night main event against Alexander Gustafsson, in Sweden no less. This fight would have been the one right before he fought JBJ, but Alex had a little baby cut on his head, and Sweden was like, that partially healed little cut is way too dire. Who knows the consequences of such devastation? And so we went from a title eliminator with the hottest guy outside the UFC and rising star Gus to the debuting Ilir Latifi, because they didn't have any other choice, because he trained with Gus and he was already in Sweden. And as you can imagine, this one wasn't even close. And how could it have been? Mousasi would earn all 3 rounds on all 3 judges' cards. Number 9, Trey Teligman. Okay, so if you know this name, the chances are that you know it because he was responsible for one of the biggest upsets that's ever happened. And he did it on short notice. Just 2 weeks after Ken Shamrock pulled out of his bout with Igor Vovchanchyn at Pride 13, teammate Trey took the spot and became only the second fighter to beat Vovchanchyn after Mark Coleman broke his 30-plus win streak. It was massive. So what is he doing in this video? Well, it was a big deal, but it was also pretty much the only major win in Trey's entire career. In fact, after the bout, he wouldn't compete again for more than 2 years before returning to the UFC for his 4th bout in the promotion. His other 3 KO/TKO losses to Vitor Belfort and Pedro Hizzo, and a submission victory over Brad Kohler, who has lost to Dos Caras Jr. and has a 19-15 career record. For reasons that escape me beyond him being in the Lion's Den, after this 2-year layoff, Teligman was put in a rematch with Hizzo, succumbing to a doctor's stoppage in the 2nd round. And it's here where our story starts. The 7-4-1 Teligman, now 2 more years removed from the comeback fight and loss to Hizzo, so that's 1 fight in 4 years at 40 years of age, would be a late replacement at UFC 54 to face former and future heavyweight champion Tim Sylvia, whose last UFC bout was his first fight with Andrei Arlovski for interim gold. The Maniac would get the only head kick KO of his career in the 1st round, and Teligman would never fight again. Number 8, Chris Camozzi. Yoel Romero versus Jacare Souza was just one of those matchups on paper that you thought, is this even allowed? Can we put these 2 humans in a cage together and let them fight? They were both very much middleweight boogeymen, and it was such an awesome idea, but it took 3 bookings to make it finally happen. That's how determined the UFC was, though. The 2nd time around, when they were scheduled for a Fox card, Romero dropped out just a week before the fight because of his knee, and you know how those Fox cards were. There's only 4 bouts on the main card. You can't have one drop, so somebody was gonna fight Jacare, damn it, and that somebody was unfortunately Chris Camozzi, who'd already known the horrors of competing against Gatorman. The first time they met was 2 years previous, and Souza would literally put Camozzi to sleep. From there, he'd hit a 3-fight skid and be cut from the UFC, UFC. This was his second time.
Outside the UFC sucks. You know, it's hard to find places to pay.
Fighting on the regional scene after that, Chris's ticket back into the big leagues was to sacrifice himself to the Fox gods, and he did so, getting armbarred in half a round. But he turned that into 6 more UFC paydays, so who's the real winner? Number 7, John Makdessi. Do you remember that really brief period where Donald Cerrone was just on fucking fire from like 2013 to 2016, where he really got that legendary rep that he carried with him for the rest of his career? 12-1 during that run. The single loss was a damn title challenge against Rafael dos Anjos. No shame there. But did you know that he earned that title shot by beating John Makdessi? Yeah, it's true, but it was more of a whole body of work type thing. You had to be there. And to be fair, he had a run of 4 bonuses in 4 stops, the last 2 Edson Barbosa and Jim Miller. Then he spoiled Eddie Alvarez's debut, demolished the hype for Miles Jury, and then earned a questionable decision against a former champion in Benson Henderson. But it was a win. The dude was absolutely killing it. He was next supposed to solidify his place as the next title contender in a bout with Khabib Nurmagomedov, who for a second time during this period was forced out of a cowboy fight, this time 3 weeks out. Funny enough, that was the last time Makdessi had fought, just 3 weeks earlier. Up to that point, you could argue that John's best win was Darren Cruikshank from Tough, not exactly knocking down the door for a title challenge. Cerrone would finish Makdessi off with a second round head kick. Number 6, Chris Moutinho. I will say, however you feel about Chris Moutinho, you do feel some way about him, and that's more than can be said about a lot of fighters who very briefly appear in the UFC and then never show up again. For Chris, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He was 8-4 on the regional scene with no real prospect of being a UFC fighter, certainly not fighting a Sean O'Malley, who was being prepped by the promotion to be the next big star. Mr. Skittles, they called him. Taste the rainbow. That was what Luis Smolka was going to do on that night at UFC 264, but a couple weeks out, he dropped from the fight, leaving Sean, the future star, without anybody to showcase his talents against. That was until a green-haired angel appeared to fulfill his own dreams while saving the UFC from losing the first bout of a massive pay-per-view. The match would end up fight of the night, but not because it was competitive, but because Moutinho took an ungodly amount of punishment. 230 significant strikes over the course of 3 rounds.
I didn't hear no bell.
It serves as the 3rd biggest strike differential in UFC history, only behind Max Holloway's beatdown of Brian Ortega and Calvin Kattar. Number 5, Daryl Horcher. I think this one sucks more because we didn't get the fight with Tony Ferguson, so like I partially blame and hate Daryl Horcher for that, but you know, it's literally not his fault, but I still hate him. I don't know. I'm just lashing out and have chosen him unfairly as a target. Jokes aside, Horcher was the CFCC lightweight champion prior to that bout. He'd had some experience in Bellator, although he lost to notoriously busted prospect Felipe Nover. But you know, this wasn't some guy they picked up off the street. We'll get to a fighter like that later. That said though, this is still a horrible fight. Your debut is against Khabib Nurmagomedov, the guy who was 22-0, whose last win was against the guy who was currently champion, Rafael dos Anjos, and the only reason he himself is not in the title picture is because he's been plagued with injuries on the shelf for 2 years. Yeah, this was gonna go great. And truly, the only reason this fight happened at all is because Khabib was desperate to get back into the cage and do something, anything, and that anything was Daryl Horcher. So the UFC did the MMA equivalent of popping that lamb into the T-Rex paddock in Jurassic Park. The Eagle would get a second round TKO. Number 4, Michael Bisping.
Shut the fuck up.
Calm down, calm down. Context is everything. I guarantee you that once I explain this one to you, you're gonna agree with me entirely. Take a deep breath. Everything's gonna be fine. Yes, undoubtedly, Michael Bisping is a great fighter and one that is head and shoulders above anybody else that is appearing on this list. But that doesn't mean that he can't be utilized in a terrible way as a replacement, and the UFC absolutely did this man dirty for the final fight of his career. See? I told you that you were gonna agree with me. I'm talking about Mike replacing Anderson Silva in the bout with Kelvin Gastelum. Yeah, you probably forgot that Kelvin and Anderson were gonna fight. This bout actually got canceled twice. The first time because Gastelum popped for wacky tobacco. What an absolutely stupid thing. They even took a win away because of it. Hilarious. But the second time, this time, it was because Anderson was having his own issues with USADA, and not the kind related to Smokin' Mary Jane. And so the UFC needed a new headliner for their fight night card in Shanghai. Gotta get a hold of that Chinese MMA market. But what big name would step in on 2 weeks' notice against one of the tougher outs in the division, no matter what point of his career he's in? How about the very recently, 3 weeks previously, probably concussed Michael Bisping coming off his loss to George St. Pierre? Perfect idea. What could go wrong? Probably gonna be a great fight. Oh no, that's right. Kelvin KO'd him in half a round, and Bisping never fought again. Great stuff. Great retirement fight. Number 3, Patrick Cummins. Cummins. On paper, I can kind of understand this one, but no, not really. This was really dumb. I mean, this is like the lowest form of trying to make intrigue for a fight that the UFC absolutely knew was going to be horrible. So Daniel Cormier was about to finally make the move down to light heavyweight, and to introduce him to the division was former champion Rashad Evans. A fantastic choice, honestly. But unfortunately, just 10 days out, Evans had to drop from the event due to an injury, and so the UFC was in a tough spot. They could just reschedule the fight. I mean, it wasn't like it was a headliner, but this was an early Ronda Rousey pay-per-view, so maybe they thought the card needed more than Rory Mack versus Damian Maia. Whatever the case, the UFC literally stopped at a coffee shop and picked up his new opponent, barista and former Olympic wrestling team training partner Patrick Cummins. He hadn't fought in nearly a year, only had 4 pro bouts, all regional shows, but for an old Strikeforce he prelimed, but he was more than willing to claim all over social media and in public that he made DC cry in wrestling practice.
I know all Daniel's weaknesses. I know that I can push him and he will break.
So the guy who didn't compete in the Olympics was going to out-wrestle and out-MMA the guy who did compete in the Olympics and was quickly becoming one of the top fighters in the world. Got it. Cool story, UFC. Pat got TKO'd in 79 seconds. Number 2, Tanya Evinger. I don't think anybody would have had much confidence in any fighter going up against Chris Cyborg, no matter who you'd put in there for that vacant UFC featherweight title bout. Even if the vacated champion GDR had stuck around, I think everybody would have been pretty well sure that Cyborg was coming out on top, despite Durandamy being one of the truer threats that division had to offer. That was just how dominant Chris Cyborg was. Eventually, Megan Anderson would be given the opportunity, and while it would be her debut, at 8-2 with impressive size and growing skills, as well as an interim gold at featherweight in Invicta, the only real active 145-pound division in the sport, the prospect of her going up against Cyborg was exciting. But a month out, Anderson would pull herself from the card, and now the UFC yet again needed a new opponent for Cyborg. Their choice was WMMA pioneer Tanya Evinger. Tanya was tough as shit, had fought everybody going back more than a decade, and was at the time the Invicta Bantamweight champion on an 8-fight win streak. But of course, the Bantamweight division's best talent now lied in the UFC, and more than a decade of experience was also a lot of miles. In an interview that no longer exists, unfortunately, I got a chance to talk with Evinger about that fight, and I remember that she was very candid about her chances and had no delusions. But how was she supposed to turn that opportunity down?
That's what being a world champion is. So you fight everybody they put in front of you. You don't say no to anybody.
Tanya showed her toughness getting through to the 3rd round despite a constant onslaught by Cyborg, but would finally succumb to the damage. Number 1, Fabio Maldonado.
His name is Fabio Mabababo. I'm saying his name right.
What were we even doing with this one? Why was Fabio Maldonado, a light heavyweight, filling in for Junior Dos Santos against Stipe Miocic? This was the only fight you could make, UFC? Like, there were literally no other actual heavyweights available to fight Miocic? And Stipe and JDS, they're at the top of the division. You couldn't get a 205er that was closer to the top of that division at least? I mean, you might as well have thrown a bantamweight in there. You might as well. This abomination of a bout would be put together when 3 weeks prior to them main eventing a tough finale, JDS pulled out with a hand injury. For whatever reason, the UFC decided that Fabio Maldonado, who wasn't on the card or anything, or had an opponent scheduled, was the best choice. And again, Maldonado was a light heavyweight. He'd been fighting at light heavyweight for 4 years. Every single one of his UFC bouts. He'd just had one 3 months earlier and wasn't planning on moving up. Was it just because they were in Brazil, so they needed someone they didn't have to fly international? Or was it like, which fighter is closest to Uber to the arena? I'd love to hear their logic. Whatever the case, and this is going to shock you, Stipe, the future greatest heavyweight in UFC history, beat Fabio the fuck up with just 11 strikes on his way to a 35-second TKO victory and performance of the night bonus. Look, I am all for fighters getting more money, but you gave him a performance of the night bonus for beating up Fabio Maldonado. I sure hope poor Fabio was given some discretionary bonuses himself. I'd give a discretionary bonus to the editor of this video, Max Randall. Please follow him on all his socials, check out his wonderful YouTube channel, and send him pictures of adorable pets. A massive and forever thank you to our channel members. Appreciate you guys so much. If you want to be a member, hit the join button. There's one flat rate now and exclusive content. Like and subscribe to replace Habib in a fight short notice as well. Leave a comment about which late replacement bummed you out the most. And thank you so much for watching. Let's do this again in the near future.